There is a quiet moment that appears in many relationships, a moment that often arrives too late. It is the moment when someone finally realizes the value of a presence that is no longer there. At first, nothing dramatic happens. The distance begins quietly. Less effort, less attention, less curiosity. And when someone continues giving despite that distance, the imbalance slowly grows. Because what is always available rarely feels urgent. But something interesting happens the moment that energy changes. When the person who was always present becomes quiet. When the messages stop arriving first. When attention is no longer offered endlessly. At first, the shift is barely noticeable. Life continues. Days pass. But slowly, a question begins to appear in the mind. Something feels different. The familiar presence is no longer as close. The certainty that once existed begins to dissolve. This is the first stage of realization. Not regret yet, just curiosity. A quiet sense that something has changed. And curiosity has a way of turning into awareness. Because absence reveals what constant presence once hid. When someone steps back and returns their focus to their own life, their own growth, their own path, space appears. And in that space, reflection begins. The mind revisits old conversations, old moments, old gestures that once felt ordinary. Suddenly, those moments look different. The attention that once felt guaranteed now appears rare. The effort that once seemed normal now feels meaningful. And slowly, the realization deepens. What once felt easily replaceable begins to feel unique. This is when the emotional shift truly begins. Because the mind starts asking a difficult question. Did I lose something valuable? Did I take something for granted? This is where regret quietly enters the story. Not loudly, not immediately, but gradually. Memories return. Moments that were overlooked begin to carry weight. Words that were ignored begin to echo. And with each reflection, the absence becomes more noticeable. But by this point, something important has already changed. The person who once waited is no longer standing still. Their life has continued forward. Their energy has moved toward growth, toward purpose, toward new experiences. And that movement changes everything. Because respect is rarely created by staying where you are not valued. It is created the moment someone realizes you are capable of leaving. Not with anger, not with revenge, just quietly, with dignity. That quiet departure leaves an impression that is difficult to forget because it shows something powerful: self-respect. And self-respect creates a kind of presence that cannot be ignored. When someone chooses themselves instead of endlessly chasing attention, their value becomes clearer than words ever could explain. By the time this realization fully arrives, another truth becomes visible. What was once easily available is no longer guaranteed. And what is no longer guaranteed suddenly feels important. This is the moment when many people attempt to reconnect, not because the past has changed, but because the absence has revealed what the presence once meant. Yet by this point, the story has already shifted. Because the person who once tried to hold everything together has learned something deeper. Their worth was never dependent on being chosen. Their value was never determined by someone else's attention. And once that understanding becomes real, the need for validation quietly disappears. At that point, life moves differently. Not through chasing, not through proving, but through calm confidence. Because the most powerful transformation in relationships is not making someone realize what they lost. It is realizing your own value long before anyone else does. And once you see it clearly, walking away no longer feels like a loss. It feels like freedom.